When people imagine the fall of the Roman Empire, they often see a grand spectacle. Barbarian hordes storming the gates, proud legions collapsing in the dust, and poisoned emperors dying in marble halls. But empires rarely die in one dramatic moment. They decay slowly, from within, and one of the most silent yet deadly forces behind that decay is always money. Rome did not simply fall because of foreign invasions or corrupt rulers. It fell because its currency, the lifeblood of its economy, rotted away. And that decay offers a lesson for every modern nation that believes it can manipulate money without consequence. For centuries, the empire's economic foundation was a single shining coin, the silver denarius. First struck around 211 BCE, it was nearly pure silver, trusted across the known world. Roman soldiers carried it in their pouches, merchants demanded it in every deal, and ordinary citizens saved it as their measure of wealth. The denarius was more than money, it was faith made metal. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in the denarius. And as long as they trusted the denarius, they believed in Rome. But running an empire was not cheap. The legions had to be paid, the aqueducts maintained, the grand roads stretched across continents, and endless wars financed on distant frontiers. By the 2nd century CE, the empire had grown enormous and exhausted. Its borders were under siege by Germanic tribes in the north and the Parthians in the east, while revolts simmered within. Tax revenues lagged behind expenses, and the emperors, ever desperate, turned to an ancient political trick, debasement. Rather than demanding higher taxes, which risked rebellion, they quietly reduced the silver content of the denarius. The coins looked the same, but they were no longer what they seemed. Under Emperor Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, each denarius contained about 95% pure silver. By the time of Emperor Caracalla, more than 2 centuries later, it had dropped to around 50%. And under Emperor Gallienus, in the mid-3rd century, the once proud denarius contained less than 5% silver, little more than a bronze disc with a thin silver wash. People noticed. They could feel the difference in their hands, see it in the dull shine of the coin, and sense it in the marketplace. Confidence began to crumble. Inflation surged. The price of a measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius now required dozens. Soldiers, no longer fooled by the new coins, demanded higher pay to keep up with rising prices. Merchants stopped accepting denarii altogether, preferring barter or gold instead. And across the provinces, from the bustling markets of Alexandria to the quiet farms of Gaul, the old system began to collapse. The more trust eroded, the more desperate the emperors became. They struck more and more coins, each worth less than the one before, hoping that sheer quantity could replace real value. But the mathematics of faith doesn't work that way. Once belief in money is lost, no mint can print it back. It was the beginning of a vicious cycle, one that would soon spin entirely out of control. The storm broke in what historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century. From the year 235 to 284 CE, Rome plunged into almost 50 years of chaos, a time when its borders trembled, its rulers fell one after another, and its money became almost worthless. Armies rebelled, provinces seceded, and plague swept through the empire. In some years, 2 or even 3 men claimed the title of emperor, only to be assassinated before their statues were finished. But beneath the politics and bloodshed lay a deeper sickness, the collapse of Rome's financial heart. Taxes were still demanded, but the coins used to pay them were now almost pure bronze. Farmers refused to hand over their grain for money that no longer bought anything. Trade routes that had once stretched from Spain to Syria began to dry up. Merchants turned to barter or demanded payment in kind, wheat for cloth, olive oil for iron. Even the legions, Rome's pride, grew restless. Soldiers who once served for loyalty now demanded gold or goods instead of worthless coins. The empire that had once united the Mediterranean with its currency was now splintering because of it. In a desperate attempt to restore order, one ruler after another tried to control the chaos. Then came Emperor Diocletian, a man of iron discipline who believed Rome could be saved by force and regulation. When he took the throne in 284 CE, he found an empire exhausted, its treasury empty, its farms abandoned, its roads unsafe. Determined to stop the collapse, Diocletian unleashed a wave of reforms. He reorganized provinces, strengthened borders, and, most famously, tried to stop inflation by command. In the year 301 CE, he issued a decree that would become infamous through history: the Edict on Maximum Prices.
It listed more than 1,000 goods and services, from wheat and wine to wages and shipping fees, each with a government fixed price.
No one was allowed to charge more. To do so was to risk death. At first, people obeyed out of fear. But soon, reality rebelled.
How could a merchant sell a loaf of bread at yesterday's price when the coins in his hand bought half as much?
How could farmers sell grain when the cost of seed and labor had already doubled? Markets emptied. Black markets flourished in back alleys and countryside barns. The empire's economy went underground. The emperor could command soldiers, but not trust, not value, not the invisible thread that makes money work. Across Rome's cities, shopkeepers began to shutter their stalls. In the provinces, people returned to self-sufficiency, growing what they ate and trading quietly among neighbors. Money, once the engine of empire, was now an object of suspicion. The law could threaten death for breaking the emperor's price controls. But no law could make a broken coin whole. By the end of Diocletian's reign, the denarius was effectively dead. And though order would be briefly restored by those who followed, the heart of Rome's economy had already stopped beating. As the empire staggered under the weight of its failures, a new emperor rose from the turmoil. Constantine, a man both shrewd and visionary. He understood what his predecessors could not, that faith in money was faith in the empire itself. Without restoring one, the other could not survive. By the time Constantine came to power in the early 4th century, the denarius, once the proud symbol of Rome's might, had become little more than scrap metal. Its silver sheen was gone, its weight inconsistent, its value mocked even by peasants. Merchants in Antioch refused it outright. In North Africa, traders demanded Egyptian grain or Byzantine copper instead. Even soldiers, the very backbone of Rome, refused their pay unless it came in gold. The empire's economy, once as vast as its armies, had turned into a patchwork of barter and distrust. Constantine made a bold move. Around 312 CE, he introduced a new coin, the solidus, a pure gold currency of unchanging weight and high purity. Unlike the hollow denarius, the solidus gleamed with stability. It carried the emperor's image, yes, but it also carried trust, and that trust slowly began to return. Across the empire, markets reopened. Merchants accepted coins again. Trade with the East revived, and for a brief moment, Rome's pulse steadied. The solidus would endure for centuries, long after Rome's western half fell, as the foundation of the Byzantine Empire's wealth. It was strong, simple, and honest, a currency worthy of belief. But by the time Constantine's reforms took hold, the damage to the West was already irreversible. The great machine of the Roman world had been hollowed out. The armies could no longer be fully paid or fed. The roads that once tied the empire together began to crumble. Tax collectors arrived to find empty villages. Trade caravans vanished. The once mighty markets of Gaul and Hispania lay silent. In the Senate halls, noblemen still spoke proudly of Rome's glory, but outside those marble walls, a different reality spread. The empire's strength had been built on confidence. In law, in leadership, and above all, in money. Now that confidence was gone. Every new coin struck was a reminder of what had been lost. So when the so-called barbarians finally came, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, Rome was already broken inside. They didn't destroy a living giant. They toppled a hollow shell. The collapse of the denarius was not just a financial event. It was the slow unraveling of an entire civilization. Proof that when money loses meaning, everything else follows. Faith, trade, armies, and order all crumble once the currency that binds them turns to dust. Rome's fall was not a single day of defeat, but a long, silent erosion. And its currency collapse was one of the sharpest blades carving its end. Centuries passed, but Rome's warning did not fade. Its story whispered through every marketplace, every mint, every empire that believed it could cheat the laws of value. The lesson was always the same: when money dies, nations follow. So what does the fall of Rome truly mean for us? It means that the destruction of currency is not an accident of history. It is a pattern. When governments discover they can create money from nothing, they always will. And when they do, the people always pay. History's echo rang again in the 20th century, in the heart of Europe. After the First World War, Germany was crushed under the weight of the Treaty of Versailles, forced to pay reparations it could never afford. Instead of confronting the debt, Its leaders reached for the same old imperial trick. They printed money. Marks poured from the presses, paper replacing silver, promises replacing value. It was Rome all over again, but with printing presses instead of mints. By 1923, the nightmare was complete. A loaf of bread that had cost 1 mark before the war now cost 200 billion. Shopkeepers changed prices several times a day. Children played with bundles of cash, stacking notes like building blocks. People carried their wages home in wheelbarrows, and by the time they arrived, the money was already worthless. Retirees who had saved their whole lives saw their pensions vanish overnight. Middle-class families who had owned shops or homes were ruined. Meanwhile, those who had debts, farmers, industrialists, and speculators, found their burdens erased by inflation. They started anew, while millions starved. The result was not just economic ruin, it was spiritual. When people lose faith in money, they lose faith in society itself. And in that vacuum of despair and anger, something dark grew. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy the German mark, it destroyed hope, paving the road for Adolf Hitler and the radical ideologies that followed. Rome's disease had returned, wearing a modern face. The pattern did not stop there. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe followed the same path. Faced with collapsing farms, shrinking production, and rising debt, the government turned to the printing press, the same false cure. By 2008, inflation had reached levels so absurd they could hardly be measured. An annual rate of 89.7 sextillion%. Prices doubled every single day. Shops couldn't replace tags fast enough. Workers demanded pay twice daily just to survive. Eventually, the Zimbabwean dollar was abandoned entirely. People began trading in US dollars and South African rand, while the government that had once promised prosperity was left bankrupt and despised. The story was ancient and new all at once. Another empire, another deception, another collapse. Again and again, history repeated the same truth. You can't print value. You can only destroy it. From Rome to Weimar Germany to Zimbabwe, the pattern remained unbroken. Governments spend beyond their means, debase their money, the elite shelter in real assets, and the common people are left with paper and promises that turn to ash. The centuries change, the faces change, but the game, and its cost, remain the same. The Roman disease didn't end with emperors or kings, it only evolved. Even in today's polished world of skyscrapers, stock markets, and digital banks, the same pattern repeats beneath the surface. The names have changed, the tools have changed, but the illusion is identical. In 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a decision that would echo through every generation to follow. He ended the gold standard, the final link between the U.S. dollar and any tangible anchor. From that moment, the dollar, like the Roman denarius before it, was no longer tied to real value. It became what economists call a fiat currency, backed not by metal, but by trust. Trust in politicians. Trust in central bankers. Trust in the illusion that paper itself could hold worth. And, just as in Rome, the temptation to spend beyond means became irresistible. Governments borrowed, printed, and promised more with each passing decade. Debt soared. Money supply ballooned. And while the world didn't see wheelbarrows full of cash, it saw something quieter, subtler, the steady erosion of purchasing power. $1 in 1971 could buy what now takes over $6 to purchase. The coins look the same, the bills look the same, but the value inside them has been hollowed out. The illusion is cleverly disguised. Politicians call inflation growth. They tell citizens that rising wages mean prosperity, even as prices climb faster. They frame debt as investment, even when it funds consumption. And they point to stock markets and property booms as signs of wealth, though most people own little or none of either. It's the same trick the Roman emperors played, convincing the masses that nothing fundamental has changed, while quietly extracting value from every paycheck, every coin, every dream. But what makes this age more dangerous than Rome or Weimar or Zimbabwe is scale. This time, the game is global. Every major economy runs on fiat currency, massive debt, and central banks ready to print trillions at the first sign of trouble. If one empire collapses today, the shock ripples through the entire world, through markets, pensions, and savings that exist only as digital numbers. And as history teaches, the ones who suffer most are never the elites who own real assets. It's the millions who depend on salaries, pensions, and savings denominated in fragile, faith-based money. So what should you take away from Rome's ancient warning? First, inflation is not an accident. It is policy, a silent tax that governments have used for 2,000 years. Second, real wealth is not paper or digits, but things that retain worth when money burns. Land, skills, productive assets, and knowledge. And third, never assume stability is permanent. The Romans in the 1st century would have laughed if told their coins would one day be worthless. The Germans in 1913 would have mocked the idea of carrying cash in wheelbarrows. Zimbabweans in the 1980s believed independence would bring prosperity. Yet every one of them lived to see the same story unfold. The fall of Rome teaches a brutal truth. Financial collapse begins slowly, then happens all at once. When money stops being real, society itself begins to crumble. Contracts fail. Trade stops. Armies dissolve. Governments lose legitimacy. And in the end, the barbarians at the gate are never the true destroyers. The real killer always hides inside the treasury. History does not repeat, but it rhymes with deadly precision. And those who refuse to listen are doomed to relive it. Rome's collapse wasn't just about greed or bad leadership. It was about the fragile nature of money itself, and how power always finds a way to corrupt it. If this truth opened your eyes, remember, history never stopped teaching. It's still whispering the same warning. And only those who understand it will survive when the next empire falls.